Very welcome everyone to this seminar, which is done in cooperation between the Swedish Institute of International Affairs in Stockholm, where I am now, and the Trans-European Policy Studies Association, which is a network of research institutes to which also UI belongs. My name is Gunilla Herolf. I'm a senior associate research fellow here at this institute. Today we will deal with the theme European solidarity, and we will address the questions about what it means in terms of definition and also what it can mean in terms of policies of the European Union. We talk a lot about European solidarity these days, but at the same time, it's not easy to give a precise definition about this concept. And we have also seen on many occasions that the European countries, not least the countries within the European Union, have very different opinions about it. Now, these facts are the background to a research program called Europe's Future, in which authors from almost all European countries have dealt with European solidarity. And in about 2 months, we will have a book, European Solidarity in Action and the Future of Europe, Views from the Capitals, to be published by the Springer Publishing House. I'm the author of the chapter of Sweden. It's a very small chapter, I should say also. But I have briefly described the Swedish policies in terms of European solidarity. The examples that I have brought up are the COVID-19 crisis, in which Sweden was part of the so-called Frugal Four, which also created some discussions in Sweden, but I also bring up the migration crisis in 2015, in which Sweden received more asylum seekers than any other EU member. These are only 2 examples of policies where European countries took and take different positions. So in order to shed more light on what European solidarity should and can mean, I have invited 3 particularly knowledgeable persons. So I'm going to pose some questions to these 3. And the first thing I'm interested in is to know how they look on the issue of what European solidarity can mean. So we will have 3 short introductions from each of them, and then a discussion among them. And at the very end, we will invite questions also to the speakers. So the first person I would like to invite here is Michael Keding. He is professor at the University of Duisburg-Essen, also a Jean Monnet professor, with a very long experience of European integration and European Union politics. And previously, he's also been visiting professor at the College of Europe in Bruges, in Brugge, and visiting fellow at the IPA Institute of Public Administration in Maastricht. He's also one of the 3 editors of this publication that I've been talking about, and not to forget, also former chairman of TEPSA. So I would like to invite you, Michel, to make the first introduction here about European solidarity. Please.
Yes, thank you very much for your kind introductory words, Gunilla, and the invitation to speak to you and to share my views on, and the views also of others around solidarity in practice across the European Union. And the question you put up there in terms of concept, what does actually sovereignty mean? I probably would love to start with the very simple statement that European solidarity is about understanding each other. And that's exactly what this book is all about, because the European Union and European integration does only work as long as we keep on being interested in what all 27 member states think in various aspects. And obviously, they think very differently, and they might indeed have very different interests. And that's exactly where we get it. But I would like to stress the point that solidarity is less about defending own interests. That's probably a discussion we will be having anyhow. I would more at this point stress the point that solidarity is a European value and maybe, or hopefully also a motive for action at the European Union level. Because in the end, the European Union is a union of people and nation states, of both, of sovereign nation states. We have to underline this. And interdependence between human beings and states create a moral duty, in my opinion, for supporting each other at all and during all times, in times of crisis in particular. And we have seen quite many of those over the last couple of years and decades. Now, so you could actually say, if you want, that it is a cornerstone of European integration, and that solidarity can be interpreted or should be interpreted as understanding each other and being aware of our differences across the 27 EU member states and the interdependencies on policies and joint responsibilities for a common future of European integration. So, and this is exactly what I think this publication is also about. With 41 chapters, you see that practice, or European solidarity in practice, is a shared contribution vis-à-vis the future of Europe. Only together, only by solidarity in practice, we have been able to fight the current pandemic. That's at least my argument, and I'm convinced, and I'm happy to underline this with figures and more information, to find the right medicine, to actually raise money in order to make sure that it's the sizes of population that matter, and not the sizes of the GDP, whether and how many vaccines and doses of vaccines you get, because otherwise Germany could have done a probably better deal without the European Union. But no, that's not what the European Union is all about. It is about making sure that all 27 member states get their share, and that together, in living solidarity, we will make sure that we have the right medicine, but also strengthen the Euro zone and solve the migration challenge, secure Europe's role in the world, and make a valuable contribution to challenges such as the climate change as such. So, in a way, the moment European solidarity in practice works, it's also an opportunity and a way to gain back sovereignty for the European Union, for individual EU member states. I think that's a very important point. And that's why, and the reason why we strongly believe in this concept of solidarity in the European Union, is that also all the EU institutions are inspired by solidarity. If you look at the composition of the European Parliament, the division of members of across, it is solidarity very much in practice. You have, if you look at the definition of the qualified majority voting in the Council, in the European Council, in Council more particularly, you see it's all about solidarity in practice, because otherwise we would have a very different system put in place in order to agree on laws and new legislation. But European solidarity requires a number of issues, and that's where we might still be weak. And that is clearly European identity. A European solidarity cannot be taken for granted and needs to be backed up by a European public. And that's why I think European solidarity needs a transnational communication space. And that's exactly the reason why we have this book with these 41 chapters, because in the end, it's about understanding each other. And by understanding and getting there, we need a European space. And that's exactly what we are currently doing here. Thank you very much for the invitation, Gunilla, and I give back to you.
Thank you very much for this insightful remarks, Michel. I would like to give the word to Katarina, but first I would like to present her. Katarina Areskog Mascarenhas is the director at CREAB. She is also chairman of the board at the Center of European Studies at Lund University, and she is member of the board at the Institute for Security and Development in Stockholm. Many of us also know her well because of her former job. She was the head of the Commission's representation in Stockholm between 2015 and 2020. And previous to that, she has been state secretary a couple of years ago, and she has held various positions at the EU Commission. So please, Katarina.
Thank you very much, Gunilla, for that kind introduction, and great to be with you, Niklas and Michael, to discuss this important subject, which I think is very topical now after the COVID pandemic. It can be discussed in so many different ways and dimensions, and also policy-wise. But just to say what Gunilla also has said, that it is a very vague concept that can be interpreted in many ways, and it's not actually clarified in the treaties, even though if you look at the Lisbon Treaty, it's mentioned very many times in Article 2 as a kind of an overarching aim of European cooperation, but also in context to migration policy, the common foreign and security policy. And we have, of course, I will come back to that, the solidarity clause itself, which is very concrete. But why is it so vague then? Well, if you look at the different roots of it, I think that gives a little bit maybe of explanation and clarity. And I believe there are different roots of this solidarity concept. I mean, there is the moral obligation that you should help your neighbor, and that comes from our common Christian beliefs. But there's also a very practical one of enlightened self-interest. And that comes, for example, if you look at the internal market, we know that if we trade with each other, the old economic policy of comparative advantage, we are all better off. So it's a kind of self-interest in the long term. But there's also the notion of reciprocity and a kind of an insurance thinking. If I'm in a crisis right now, you will help me, but I will also help you in the future when you are in a crisis. So we are also all better off if we help each other. And then there's also the shared common value in the solidarity concept, that we all have a common ground when it comes to European values. But you see there also, if we go through these different routes, there between different member states, there are different attachment, different importance attached to the different routes, I would say. So that's also maybe why it's quite vague in the treaties. So what is the state of play right now for this the solidarity concept? I would say the most practical one, which we also saw actually in the COVID pandemic, is the Article 222, which talks about that we all should act jointly in a spirit of solidarity in the case of a terrorist attack or natural or man-made disaster. And that has led to that we have this civil protection mechanism that actually was invoked during the pandemic. But we have also the solidarity thinking in the cohesion policies, and that we should reduce disparities. Some say this is more a moral obligation, others say it's a kind of compensation for the internal market. Then we have a quite recent one, the social dimension, which is a slower building one, but since the summit in Gothenburg in 2017, that has also evolved. So these you can see are quite practical. Then as Gunilla said, during COVID, we've seen also acts of solidarity, even though in the beginning the European cooperation was very criticized because countries were closing their borders, wanting to have their medical equipment for themselves. But then we have quite strong solidarity coming to the joint vaccination procurement programs, being stronger together when we've procured the vaccines, or the recovery package. So I would say in the end, the pandemic led to a stronger solidarity than before in the health field. And then we have some kind of deterrence solidarity also in terms of Brexit, saying the rest of the member states should be act in solidarity and when one country is leaving. So different kinds of solidarity. Why am I saying all of this? Well, I would like to actually link it to what Michael was saying about it's all about understanding. Because when we define the solidarity in different fields, I think that is, you can't have a common definition of solidarity. You need to go into the different policy fields. And here it's a question of understanding of each other and negotiations. But in order to negotiate what is the common concept of solidarity in a field, you need to understand each other. So therefore, I think it's fantastic that you're doing this book because you need a more common discussion. That's also why we have this Future of Europe conference to anchor and spread the knowledge of what is going on in the EU and why are we doing it. So I think whether the root is the moral obligation, it's the enlightened self-interest or reciprocity, or it's based on identity, you need to have definitions, discussions, negotiations of it. Because, for example, in the internal market, the enlightened self-interest is not obvious, or the recovery package. Why is it long-term of benefit to Sweden to have a recovery package that benefits Italy, for example? So I think I'll end this with agreeing with Michael that we need to discuss and understand the different meanings of solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarina. And last person to give his views will be Niklas Bremberg, who is a senior research fellow at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, where we are now. And he's also associate professor at the Department of Political Science at Stockholm University. He has published extensively on the evolution of the European security community in the post-Cold War era and the changing nature of European diplomatic practices. And I would also like to add that he is one of those who is most knowledgeable about the southern part of Europe and the Mediterranean problems that we have in Sweden. So, Niklas, I'm sure you will add a lot with the deep insights that you have from your research field there. So please, Niklas.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gunilla, for those kind words of introduction. Let me begin by saying congratulations to you and also to Michael for the book and for advancing this research project and contributing to our common discussion on this obviously important topic. I think my comments go very much along the same lines as Katarina and Michael. I think it's important to kind of highlight first, I think what Katarina was alluding to, the kind of the deep roots that our common political community, that is the European political community of states and peoples that Michael highlighted, it has this kind of a strong historical tradition where it comes to a sense of what it means to be a solidary citizen and what that takes and what that kind of demands of moral obligations towards political communities, in a sense that it's kind of meaningful to have a conversation about this at all. I think testifies to that historical kind of underpinnings. Now, I think but I think I come from this from a slightly different perspective, perhaps, and I'd like to draw a little bit on some of the academic work that has been done recently that I think are important and maybe also useful for our discussion here today. I think, so kind of adding to what Katarina and also Michal was saying, to me, at least as a political scientist, it is difficult to kind of envision any political community that would be able to sustain itself based on a notion of voluntary solidarity. If it was up to all members to kind of contribute as much as they like, whenever they like, obviously it's extremely hard for any political community to sustain itself. That's obviously true for states, and that's also true for the European Union, of course. If you look at it in practice, a lot of the core state functions that European or EU member states have developed historically have been more or less transferred to a common European framework, right? We see it in the treaties. Michal mentioned many of these aspects in his remarks. Katarina mentions other in her. So that's a process that we have seen, right? That is the transfer of core state powers to the EU and the European level is real, right? It's there. However, there's a lack of kind of a strong sense of collective identification with the kind of the in reality existing political community, which is centered on the EU today. And that is obviously, I think, what makes these conversations about European solidarity complicated and maybe also vague, and what Katarina was saying, because on the one hand, we think or we tend to end up in discussions of whether it's solidarity to contribute or not, whether it's in our self-interest of doing it or not. When we think about states versus member states among member states, or states versus some kind of a European level. So I think that is. So I mean, to me, it is hard not to, or it's hard to have a meaningful conversation about European solidarity if we don't connect that to important issues of identity and also important issues in the end of democracy. So to me, I mean, I think the kind of the problem that we're in now, the predicament that we're in now in the emergent political order in Europe, right, is that it's extremely it's difficult to have meaningful democratic contestation around issues that are very kind of important for ordinary citizens and their lives. Any political community or politics in general is about redistribution. That's the core of politics, right? And we have many mechanisms for doing this kind of redistribution, setting up markets, or also kind of other means of redistribution on the European level. But there is a kind of a lag or a gap between the political conversations, the democratic contestations around what kind of Europe and what kind of redistribution that we would like to see on the European level that we're seeing today. So I think so to me, and that's my kind of initial take here. To me, it's difficult to have a meaningful conversation around European solidarity if we don't also have a discussion on how do we advance democracy in Europe, and how do we advance meaningful contestation that goes beyond this kind of anti-establishment Eurosceptic parties that we are seeing in becoming more and more successful on the European level, but also on the national level. So I think that's something that we need to also maybe put on the table alongside the many insightful comments made by Katarina and Michal already in the beginning. So I'd like to end my introduction there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niklas. And I have a feeling that Michal and Katarina would like to add something to these last views too. So who will like to start? Yeah, Michel.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, that would be really nice. I think maybe just continuing where Niklas just stopped, I'm stressing the point of advancing democracy. I think that's exactly what I try to also underline, maybe in different terms, but that we in the European Union and in the member states, in order to make it all work and to continue to have solidarity as a cornerstone of European integration, we require to develop this concept of European identity further. And for this, I clearly think that we need to develop the idea of a European public, of a transnational communication space further, and to take this more seriously. And I'm not saying that this has to come from Brussels. That's not my point, not at all. To the contrary, I think this is something that needs to develop across the EU member states, and starting with the prerequisite and the precondition that we need to be interested and keep to be interested and trigger interest for the others. Because the moment we stop wondering what's happening in Cyprus or what's happening in Poland, that's the end of European integration. Then there is no point that we actually go, except for maybe economic good reasons that we might have a single market and operating. But if you want the European Union to be more than an operational single market, you need to think around this. And so the democratic notion of this concept, I think, that would be one addition. I have many more, but I maybe leave it here for the time being.
Yes, thank you. I think Niklas' comments were extremely interesting as well. And I'm thinking there is a dilemma, because a lot of what the European Union is doing is interstate solidarity, but not individual or interpersonal solidarity. So for an ordinary citizen, it might not be so obvious what it means, European solidarity, and is it worthwhile? For example, the joint procurement programs for vaccines that were incredibly important, of course, that the EU could go together, be forceful, negotiate bigger quantities to a better price than a small member state could do. But is that something people are aware of? Because it's the nation state that then distributes it to the citizens. So I don't think we in Sweden, for example, think that this is thanks to an EU joint procurement program. Also the cohesion policy, I think that's maybe not fair, because in many member states, people know that it's EU money. But again, it's the nation state that has the role to distributed. In Sweden, I'm sure, because when I was working for the Commission, there was so much cohesion money that was distributed in Sweden, but there wasn't a Swede that knew about it, because it was the nation state that took responsibility for it. So I think that the solidarity that do exist, citizen to citizens, because we are then helping each other, it's not obvious. We are not communicating it in a way. And then again, I wonder, is it desirable also that we should have more mechanism? I think Niklas mentioned you need European redistribution, but then that's against the nation state role. And I think we don't want this federal concept either. So, but there is for sure a contradiction between how the European level is coming down to the European citizens and what is the role of nation states. And I have no solution. I'm just throwing this in, hoping that somebody has a solution.
Can I add a question? Oh, sorry, Michel, you had something to say here.
Well, maybe just as an addition, but again, please go ahead also with your question and just interrupt me, because I think what it shows, the discussions we have so far, is that you can indeed have solidarity out of self-interest, right? That's clearly something that we should also not blame anyone for. I mean, this is just part of the whole variety of different tools we have in the toolbox. conceptually, but also there is, we seem to show solidarity out of self-interest, but also in economic terms very often. I mean, if you read the various chapters, for example, in the book, you will hear very often, and Gunilla in her Swedish chapter also, you introduce yourself, right, by elaborating a little bit on the frugal four, etc., and the net payers and the net receivers, and this discussion. But most interestingly, if you look at the book, and now allow me maybe to zoom into one or two countries, in Poland, for example, which is now in the news for very other reasons these days, it is very remarkable when you read the Polish chapter. Poland seems to be really much an example where solidarity is defined in a one-way road, in a one-way street. Yeah, because for historical reasons, I mean, the author argues very strongly that Poland expects to be at the receiving end of the solidarity concept. It's very simple. Yeah, it's very simple, and that's why. It's not a concept in Poland that is based on reciprocity. Not at all. If you think about European solidarity, and if you talk to Polish colleagues, their understanding is very much due to the experiences, the historical experience. It's a one-way road, and it's not a reciprocity concept. And that's important to understand. If you go, for example, to a different country, there it's all about reciprocity, right? There, if you zoom into Malta, the question here, or Luxembourg, for example, depending 50% of their employees are commuters. So the moment we had, with COVID, the closing of all borders, I mean, the Luxembourgish prime minister said, "You kill my country." And he was missing reciprocity, solidarity, simply because everyone was thinking about him or herself. The borders closed, and all by a sudden Luxembourg didn't have anyone to work for anymore, and the country was really at the bridge of a collapse. So reading those individual chapters, you all by a sudden start realizing, oh, damn it, this is really complicated. And because of historical linkages, because of the economy, because of the geographics as well. That's another notion that might be more important when we move on to the more policy relevant questions here today. The answers around solidarity do really differ across the 27 member states and beyond.
Yeah, no, I really agree with you, Michel. From my contacts with my colleagues, I'm sometimes a bit disturbed about listening to this. And when we come into migration in the next part of it, we will see it even more, I would say. No, I have a question to you. I'm wondering, how do you see solidarity in terms of the EU's policies towards other parts of the world? It has become an issue to a degree when it comes to the vaccines. We are now heading towards the third jab of vaccine for ourselves, whereas many African countries may reach about 5% of their population. And some people say we should behave otherwise. Would you say that Europe, being a very rich continent, small but very rich, also have a need for solidarity against others? Much more of the discussion in Europe today is Europe has to be strong, Europe has to be autonomous, Europe has to be an actor in the global sphere. But there is also sometimes also this other concept of what are our responsibilities. Katarina?
No, indeed. I mean, I said there are different routes of solidarity, and one of them is the more moral solidarity, which I think actually is a common theme. It's part of the European identity. So I firmly believe that Europe has such a moral obligation, and I think it's shared also by member states. The EU is actually the world's largest foreign aid donor. And I don't know, I should, if I had been in my former job, I would have known the figures, but I heard Ursula von der Leyen saying in her State of the Union, that's I don't know, maybe Niklas and Michael knows this, but half of the vaccines produced in Europe has been given to the outside of the EU, which is far more than any other continent or country has done. So I think it should, and I think it also exists, a solidarity with the rest of the world.
Very good. Michel and then Niklas.
Yeah, maybe just to make this point even stronger, I think the simple fact that in the European Union, the heads of state and government agreed to the European Commission to organize the procurement to actually, but even before, to collect money. I mean, the first big events in order to collect money in order to develop vaccines was co-organized together with the European Commission. And it was with this money that actually industries across the world, and that was not only limited to the EU, could start producing or researching to start off with around a new vaccine. So it was, and that was not just something we knew that was targeting or benefiting us, the European Union, but that would benefit all globally. I think that's an important point. Having said that, though, I also want to make a critical assessment, because in the end, if you look at the vaccines that are sent to Africa, I mean, now we are 2 years on, right? I mean, I was vaccinated for roughly half a year ago. And in Africa, we start building now, BioNTech, for example, starts building now the first factories, and we start also sending, or we have started over the last couple of months, vaccine doses to the African country, for example. But again, which vaccine doses do we send, right? Frankly, it is those that we do not use. It's AstraZeneca and everyone who doesn't want to have in the European Union. So it's also part of the story. We have to be fair here. Yes, we are the biggest donator of vaccines. That's correct. But first of all, we also got rid of everything we do not use because no one wants to be vaccinated with it. I mean, that's also part of the coin. So it is, as I said, a moral concept to it. It's also about self-interests and also economic notions. I think it comes down to this in the end again. But obviously, it's good than not having anything. But I wanted to make this nevertheless not as gloomy and glossomly as it sometimes might come across.
Very good. And then Niklas.
Yeah, I don't think I can add too much now to what Katarina and Michael has already said. But to me, again, maybe this, I mean, when it comes to the vaccine and trying to tackle or manage this global pandemic, I think the kind of that two aspects of the concept of solidarity that Katarina before kind of raised, in the sense that there is first the moral obligation to help, right? Neighbors close and far away. And then obviously it's the enlightened self-interest. We all know, that we're not going to be able to handle the pandemic unless, we get the vaccine out. Otherwise, it's just going to keep on mutating in other parts of the world, and they kind of come back to us, right? So that's very clear. But then again, I think combining this to, again, the kind of we've talked about the kind of the deep historical experiences that informs the current European project. When it comes to the outside world, I think that's also an important aspect to take into account, the kind of why Europe needs to be or show solidarity or reflect about solidarity is obviously the history that many of our countries have when it comes to colonialism and other wrongdoings that has been done in European countries, and that cannot be taken away either. So on the one hand, obviously, European integration and the EU is the promise of reforming, the promise of making something new, to break out of the old way of doing politics in Europe, right? The kind of the big power games, the great powers and stuff. Maybe we're going back to that a little bit now, since it's a tougher environment. And Gunilla, you mentioned that there are more talks now than ever. The EU needs to kind of stand up for itself and become a great power, and that the old idea that the EU experience is built on the fundamental insight that we need to transform power politics is gradually kind of being lost on us. But I think that's the only thing I'd like to add when it comes to the global dimension. That yes, Europe needs to be solidarity, and show solidarity with the rest of the world due to the experience of European history, of course.
Thank you. And now I would like to challenge you with the next question. And let's start in the other end with Niklas now. So what can it mean in terms of policies, considering the differences between the different countries? And now we can go into the different issues. I think we have to go into the different issues. Where can we find the positives, examples? Where can we find a path forward? I think Michel was a bit hinting here at saying the European Parliament was a good example of discussions across lines of various kinds. So please, Niklas, give us your views.
Yeah, I think one issue, maybe which is not maybe an issue in itself, since it connects to so many different policy areas that the EU is involved in, and that the EU is kind of very much forward-leaning, is of course climate action. And to me, that seems also to be an issue that really kind of connects the different versions of different aspects of solidarity that we have talked about. To me, obviously, it's a way to try to really use the power and the tools of the EU, right? So if the Green Deal and the EU climate law really is able to put into practice these ambitious goals of fit for 55, reducing emissions with 55% until 2030, and then achieve climate neutrality by 2050. If the EU really kind of leverage its legislative capacities, its financial capacities to help member states really achieve this, transition into a low carbon or even fossil-free economies, that's obviously a huge benefit to our economies, to our societies, and also to the world, so to speak. So to me, that seems to be maybe the key issue where we should really emphasize that this is, of course, again, as Katarina would say, enlightened self-interest. We need this, we want this for ourselves, but obviously it's something that we can make. The benefits of succeeding with this is going to be felt on a global level. Obviously, the EU being, as you said, Gunilla, small, of course, a small part, even though it's rich, but small. And in terms of global emissions, it's I don't know if it's 7 or 8% now in compared to global emissions. So obviously it's small, but still, if the EU really can achieve or deliver on this transformative, very big, ambitious climate package, I think that is really something that I would stress. Like, this is, to me, ticks so many boxes in relation to so many of aspects of solidarity that we have talked about here. So yeah, I'd like to put that on the table.
Thank you. And Katarina?
Yes. I just wanted to refer to our previous discussion first to get the record straight. What von der Leyen said. She said in the State of the Union about vaccines that the EU is the only continent that shared half of our vaccine production with the rest of the world. So 700 million doses to the European people and 700 million doses to the rest of the world, to more than 130 countries. But also, I take the point what Michel has said, that it might also have been the vaccine that the EU was not using itself. But nevertheless, I think it's quite impressive figures. But in which policy areas solidarity should be developed, I completely agree with Niklas again. I think that is, in the interest of everyone. And so it's not only European solidarity, it's global solidarity to to work on the climate issues, and if the EU can be at the forefront there, then the devil is in the detail. Of course, there are many things that can be discussed how to achieve it, but that we would need a different seminar to discuss. I mean, we have a very heated forest discussion right now in Sweden, for example. We have discussions about the taxonomy, so it's not always easy. You have the discussion on nuclear. I mean, you agree on the overall objective, but then again, coming back to Michael's first point, understanding, then you need to understand what are the motives behind each member state, what are their situation. You need to negotiate the way. But looking at other areas, if you look at Europe in particular, I think on the research, I'm seeing, and that ties also to the global tensions and relations with China, which are very difficult right now. How does Europe respond to the geopolitical tensions and the fact that the global order is changing? And there's an incredible tech race going on right now, with semiconductors being a severe shortage. Who will be the global leader in green hydrogen? We saw Macron's speech the other day said that in 2030, France will be the global leader in green hydrogen. Batteries, we have Northvolt in Sweden. So I think there is a fantastic tech race. Over the summer, the US Senate were adopting a fantastic investment program in specific sectors. So I think research, I think we should really pool our resources into research program, even though it is a big program, but it's still quite small. And there we saw how quickly European vaccines could be developed. There are fantastic resources, brains in Europe that can be pulled together. And then I think also in the wake of the COVID, I think the health field, we will see more solidarity when it comes to procurement of different, not only vaccines, assistance of each other. Common stockpiles are already decided, and strategic assets. But nothing is simple. Then that also, if you continue that arguing, you come into the also infected discussion of strategic autonomy, and that might be in in contradiction with global solidarity, because we in Sweden tend to believe in free trade and also pooling not only European resources but global resources in different fields. So nothing is easy, but just to make a couple of points. Sorry for maybe confusing more than being having straight opinions about things.
No, you're just enlarging the difficulties which are already there and which need to be enlightened the way you do. So that is great. So Michel.
Thank you very much. Yes. Since we have a very well-informed audience, allow me now to get a little bit more technical, because I think in order to answer the question, you have to agree and accept that when talking about EU policies, we need to consult the treaties, because it's in the treaties where we actually learn what possibilities and who the actors are, potential veto players, etc., etc. So we do have policies where the European Union have exclusive competence. We have policies where the European Union and the sovereign member states share competences. And we have still many policy areas where the sovereign member states coordinate themselves. And I think that is quite important to underline from the very early beginning when we talk about European solidarity and where we want to have more, that you also have to accept depending on how far the integration has gone in various policy areas, member states might be more or less willing, ready, out of self-interest, out of economic terms, out of moral duties, to actually join in and to live solidarity in practice. I think that's extremely important, and that we should not overload the European Union either with demands of solidarity in areas in particular where actually member states till now have not and could not agree to give up any of their sovereignty. And I think health is a very good example, because that's exactly the dilemma we were in. You all remember the situation with COVID-19 that, yes, we were shutting down the borders and all of this, but in the end, there was not really much the European Union could do. Once they shut the borders, okay, Schengen got kicked in, and then the European Commission could become active. But we needed the heads of state and government to come together and to basically conclude that the Commission should start acting on behalf of the member states, because there is a European interest, because out of solidarity, we want the Commission to act for the individual EU sovereign 27 member states, also in the field of health. And that's, I think, extremely important. I know it's complicated. You, the audience, you know this, but this is obviously complicated to communicate further, right? And to explain out towards my students at the university and so on and so forth. But I think this is extremely important if you want to also address the question of whether we should make solidarity more conditional. I don't think that this would be the trick, because definitely not European solidarity, because Europe is so diverse depending on which policy area you want to talk about. And the European Union works and operates very differently, whether you want to talk about even within energy, right? I mean, all the discussions now, whether the Commission should allow nuclear power to be accepted for the CO2, etc. I mean, in the end, to be very frank, the energy mix is a national competence, and there is nothing the Commission can do about it. They can have ideas and views and publish papers and opinion. I mean, that's all fine and needed and necessary. I'm not saying that it's not, but in the end, it is France's decision if they want to continue and want to achieve the goals with nuclear power, and it's Germany's decision if they do not want to look into nuclear power. So it's that easy, and that's something we always have to remind us whenever we talk and specifically cry out for more Europe, or where is Europe, or why, that we always have to first ask ourselves, so what would the European Union have to do in the first place? What it is allowed to do? And where do we not want the European Union to do anything? And that brings me maybe to a second point, Gunilla, if you allow me. You see, I'm getting all excited. The other point is migration. I mean, if you read, for example, the Maltese chapter of our book, together co-edited with Johannes Pollack and Paul Schmidt, the Maltese chapter is extremely interesting, because they consider clearly migration as the main failure of solidarity. I mean, for them, this was really the worst experience they had. Migration representing the low point of perceived solidarity. I mean, you read the chapter and it's really shocking to read. They feel they were left alone, and they probably were left alone, and we keep on leaving them alone, to be very frank, because we still do not really manage to find a solution at the European Union level. But also, if you read your chapter, Gunilla, or the Luxembourgish chapter, it's this lack of solidarity in the reception of refugees and how to deal with refugees, that this is underlined very much so. But then again, the problem here was probably most importantly, I know that it was a very difficult situation, and we had a German chancellor to announce that we would accept, that we would in Germany would open the borders, and that putting enormous pressure on all our EU member states. The problem with this announcement was, I mean, she's praised by many and she's doomed by many because of this, now after 16 years of her chancellery. But the point is that from a European perspective, the biggest problem was that she did not consult anyone. on this point. Yeah, if she had consulted before and informed all the other heads of state and government, if she had phoned, and normally she does this on all other matters, but on this she didn't, I think that was the biggest problem. And that's why this experience of solidarity went terribly wrong. And actually, I would even say, and many others would probably agree, that this unfortunately is also an example where things did not work simply, but they even put the European Union and the solidarity within the European Union at great risk. I mean, many of the problems we have right now on different policy areas are clearly linked also to this incident. And this is something that comes with a consequence, that we need to continue, that we need to consult and create a trust in order to generate a feeling of solidarity. I think that's so important. And that's why we keep on, we need to know and learn from each other. That's one thing. We need to be open to learn from each other. But the other thing is also that we need to continue to talk to each other. And that's why the European institutions, as I said also earlier, are inspired by the spirit of solidarity. Yeah, in the end, this is exactly what these institutions facilitate. The European Council, the Council of Ministers. It is their role also to bring the leaders, the ministers, and others together in order to have that exchange, in order to have actually this trust-building exercise, because that's in the end what this is all about. And if you allow me one last point, I mean, who else than the Commission, you should read the British chapter as well, who else than the European Commission was better equipped to do the negotiations on Brexit? It was Michel Barnier and his team who, in an excellent way, defended the European interests and kept on informing all the member states from the very early beginning. Every member state felt being informed. And it was perfect to choose the European Commission here, because that was a supranational institution that was, amongst others, also one of the red, I don't know how do you say, in a bull fight for the Brits. That was obviously also the cerise sur la tarte, and then a French-speaking one with a perfect accent. So that was a very perfect match in a lot of different dimensions. But in the end, it was the best choice from a European perspective to have all member states rallying behind the European Commission informing the member states on a regular basis, and even heads of state and government, like, for example, Viktor Orban, they joined in. I mean, if you remember Theresa May's appearance where was it, at the European Council meeting, when she actually came to the heads of state and governments of the European Union, hoping to get some concessions after having tried bilaterals continuously in order to break, so to say, the community. But no, they stayed together, and that was solidarity par excellence. Ireland was showered by solidarity, by European solidarity. Yeah, we basically, all EU member states, identified themselves with the border issue. And because of this, yeah, we were not willing to move a centimeter on that very topic. And that was only possible because we had an independent supranational institution inspired by the principle of solidarity, the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Misha. I agree with everything you say about the Brexit negotiations, but I just wonder about Frau Merkel. If she would have consulted with others, would Germany have done very much then? Because they would have met a number of countries that were not willing to do very much at all. And this was a big disappointment seen from the Swedish side. Sweden acted in a feeling of solidarity, waiting for others to come along, and to its huge disappointment, didn't see many come along. Germany did, but not many others. And as we mentioned before, there are still, I counted today to 11 countries in Europe who were not willing to take in any new refugees. I may be wrong, but this is what it looked in one of the documents that I saw. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, if that's possible, because the problem here probably was that this decision was taken by qualified majority. That was not an anonymous decision in the European Council.
Yeah.
So, and that never happens, as you know, right? I mean, even in the European Council, consensus is the driving decision-making rule. And in the Council, we have qualified majority on these matters, but we hardly actually implement it. Most of the legislation is still adopted by consensus. Here we made an exception. Here we started to have quotas. And that was not a very good choice, because in the end, these tricky questions, I mean, as I said, it's about trust building, it's about confidence building. If you want to have, because of the differences across EU member states, you need to continue to negotiate. We had with the budget, the rescue fund, Katharina made this very clearly, we had 4 days, or was it even 5 days? We negotiated, and in the end we had a deal, even with the Frugal Four, even with everyone joining in. We can do this if we want, but we need to talk and speak until we have a solution.
Yeah,
I think that's the point.
Can I come in with a question here? It's a long question. In case of migration, would it not be helpful to look at the federal systems in order to learn how they cope with, for example, a mass influx of refugees? For example, in the United States, some states do not receive Afghan refugees, while others do. The intake of refugees is therefore no question of solidarity, but self-understanding. And then within brackets, by the way, it took the United States until 1980 to have federal competencies on the allocation of refugees. So in order to hold the EU together, solidarity should not be an absolute demand, ? Katharina.
I mean, this is extremely difficult because it's also an emotional and sensitive issue. But it is also true that there is no competence to have, for the EU, to have a common regime on, I mean, every member state decide today how many migrants it should take. And that's what Ylva Johansson is trying to change, to have a common regime. So when Germany and Sweden took a lot during 2015, it was on a voluntary basis. They weren't forced by the EU to do it. And it is also, as the question implies, very, very difficult issue to find a common regime, because there are, for historical reasons, for many other reasons, very difficult concepts on this. So my conclusion on this is, again, I think there needs to be a lot of discussions on this to find common rules. I think it cannot be forced on member states.
And how do you see the present development? I mean, we have had influx of refugees, mainly from the south and from the southeast. And now we have the refugees instigated by Belarus, who come to Poland, who come to Lithuania, and also now to Germany, which is worried about this new development. And the EU is talking about sanctions towards Belarus. Do you think this would have any effect? What should be done here, and what should the EU do? Michel?
I mean, now putting on my German hat, perhaps for a time being, Now, as you know, we are currently in the process. We just had elections, general elections, and we are currently in the process of forming a new government. And if you look at the preparatory paperwork around the negotiations, which are currently ongoing, and we are expecting a new government to take office most likely even before the winter break, that this will be one of the big topics. All three partners, the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals, already agreed upon that they would come back to Brussels and the European Commission in order to try again to find a European solution. Because, as you know, the reform of the migration system is deadlocked. The current government, and even with the Polish situation, there's not much that you can expect right now. In terms of sanctions, I don't know. There are different positionings right now. The German government is rather reluctant to do anything right now in the coming 4 months or 3 months, to be very frank. So I'm rather skeptical that there will be any big major progress on this. But the good news is that the next government, as it looks, this will be the next government. At least another attempt will be on the agenda to find a European solution and to reform the current migration system. So that's just what I can reflect back from you directly from Germany out of the negotiations which are currently ongoing. But maybe also the German ambassador or consul is here in the audience. She might be able to join in as well.
Niklas?
Thank you, Gunilla. I think, it's, as Katarina already said, it's a very kind of emotional, sensitive question to debate, right? So, and to me, it always feels strange to think that the kind of that we talk about solidarity when it comes to refugees, and we don't focus on being solid, show solidarity with the refugees rather than trying to say that it's the quota, it's finding the right equilibrium among member states when it comes to intake of refugees. That's where the object of solidarity should be placed, so to speak. So to me, that's a complicated kind of position to take, obviously, even though we all understand the political realities that goes into this particular issue, of course. I think, to me, it has been extremely, and I hope that the audience also thinks this, that it has been very enlightening, right? Our discussion here, it really kind of highlights the complicated nature of this political community, which is the EU in a sense, and I think it's up to all of us to really think hard in terms of when it is meaningful to talk about European solidarity, when we can expect it, and when it's not, when it's meaningful to kind of put that on the table or not, since it is this complicated mix. Michal, showed us the treaties. Obviously, it's a complicated mix when it comes to competences, and also obviously the kind of the merging of interests here. So I think it has been extremely valuable here, and I think the question from the audience pointing to the US experiment is also, I think, valuable to our conversations here, since it has been. Obviously, from an outside perspective, we think about the United States as a unitary actor, but it also has, it has emerging properties, evolving properties within itself. And it's even though it has been a federation for a long time, there is still that ongoing, of course, political contestation within the US, where what should be on the federal level and what should be on the state levels, in a sense. I think obviously there are things to learn from the US, and there's also things to really ponder when we try to kind of move forward also meaningfully and on our side of the Atlantic, and try to maybe advance our cooperation or integration in Europe. But I think, for me at least, it has been really enlightening that there is this patchwork. The common European framework is really a complicated patchwork, and sometimes it is meaningful to talk about solidarity, sometimes it may be less so. Because because the kind of, how to say, the possibilities to act in solidarity or in solidarity ways are so different, right? In different areas.
What you say now, Niklas, and also the question from the audience reminds me of another discussion and research area that we have now in Europe and also within TEPSA, which is about the differentiated integration that we have in Europe. It is really, as you say, Niklas, a patchwork of integration, a patchwork of different issues which we relate to in very, very different ways, not only when talking about solidarity, but also in a number of other fields, which makes the question of solidarity much more difficult, because then we may see solidarity as one of the issues where we might be more integrated or less integrated. So my final question to you is, what is the most important things in Europe? What areas are there where we can't make a compromise, that we have to put our foot down and say, this is where we have to agree in solidarity with each other? You have about 5 minutes only, so very short. Michel, you're the first.
Yeah, if I just may jump in here, I think maybe to give an answer to your question, I think also in light of the concept you just brought in with differentiated integration, and so thinking about the future of Europe as a differentiated Europe, I mean, we are already differentiated in many respects, in many policy areas already, and it would definitely not make EU decision-making and our understanding of EU governance easier, let's put it that way, but more complicated. It also raises the solidarity aspect, right? Because some countries might feel to be singled out, to be not part of a club, of a particular club that comes with a serious risk. And if you are up for creating a European identity, a European public sphere, this is not very helpful in that regard. And we also have to make sure that member states do not start or think, just because we might develop Europe further in a more differentiated way, that solidarity is a concept that we can pick and choose a la carte from the menu, right? That we say, okay, Ireland, yes, thank you for the shower of solidarity vis-a-vis Brexit, but on taxation, there is no way we will be solidary with the European Union. Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, quite important to bring this up, right? So that we have to remind member states then, and that's why we need to talk and continue and have these forums, these European institutions to talk, to build trust and to have forums of exchange and views, because these will be the forums where in the end potentially deals will be possible, because we might be able also to convince then even the Irish to remind them of the good old days of the Brexit and the solidarity they witnessed par excellence. And here maybe also showing some flexibility vis-a-vis tax harmonization. I mean, there's always hope, right? So with this positive notion, I would give back the floor to you, Gunilla. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give it on to Katarina.
Thank you. That's a very tricky question, Gunilla.
Yeah, I know.
But I'm thinking, because you said, which are the most important areas where we really need solidarity? I think it depends on how far we have come in our cooperation in different areas. I mean, let's say healthcare, for example, then I don't think, or I'm certain that day-to-day healthcare, we don't need solidarity in that. And we have very different systems, and that should be left for the nation states and maybe for the regions even. That's nothing we should have on the EU level. But in a crisis situation, then we definitely need EU cooperation. Then it's maybe vital. It's even vital that we have solidarity. So you have to go from sector to sector. Maybe the most obvious ones is the foundation of the of the EU with the economic cooperation, because that is, again, the enlightened self-interest, not maybe vital as in the healthcare or crisis situation, but I think everybody agrees that we are better off together if we have open borders. We have the 4 freedoms. That is a solidarity. I think the 4 freedoms is nobody wants to, almost nobody wants to go back on that. And then future looking, Niklas was already mentioning the climate issue is maybe in the long term the most vital issue for solidarity. So I think it depends, again, very much on the area and what level of cooperation you are at. On migration, we need to take baby steps, I think, and see where we create the first positive movements that everybody, and I must, this is extremely boring and probably people will think I'm 200 years old when I'm doing this, but I must cite still the Schuman Declaration, because I think he was so smart. He said that Europe will not be made all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements which first create a de facto solidarity. It's very old-fashioned to do those kind of citations, but I think there's a lot of truth into it. So that's my final word. And thank you for extremely interesting discussions.
Thank you. Niklas, please.
Thank you, Gunilla, and thank you, Katarina. I think citing the Schuman Declaration is always a good exercise. We usually do that at our seminars in European politics here at the university, to have the students read that declaration, because there's so much in it, right? And we can have so much discussion on what actually came out of that initial kind of push towards European integration from us. I think it's always a good day, when you cite the Schuman Declaration. But to me, I'd like to then end with a paradox, since that's also maybe intriguing for listeners and future students of European politics. To me, it's very hard to envision a well-functioning European common market without the rule of law and without strong democratic institutions on a national level. We know that the market economy cannot function without good governance, so to speak. This is the quality of government argument coming out of our colleagues in Gothenburg and other places. So to me, it's extremely important that the EU is not backing down when member states are dismantling the rule of law, dismantling democratic institutions at home, in pure self-interest, because we know that we're not going to have a functioning common market without functioning institutions and rule of law at home. But it's a paradox itself, since we say that we respect sovereignty, and we want sovereignty, obviously, and we want to respect national democracies. It can be a democratic decision somehow for certain member states to actually roll back the rule of law and even liberal democracy. It's the fundamental democratic paradox at the heart also of our common project. So to me, it's fundamental that we stick to rule of law, that we uphold it, and also try to do it from a European level. But at the same time, it seems paradoxical, since we have been, for an hour or more discussing the limits of European integration on the back of the principle of state sovereignty. So I don't know if that's an invitation for a new seminar or a book, Gunilla, or something that, or it's just the eternal question that we
look at Michelle now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I am with that paradox. But to me, that's extremely important: rule of law and democracy.
So my last words are an immense thank you for this very, very excellent discussion and really deep insights that the three of you have. So from my heart, thank you very much. And goodbye. And see you soon, I hope.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Greetings to Stockholm.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.